around the world. Okay, thank you for joining us today for this global session, Navigating U.S. Student Visas. It is designed specifically for our value agents partners around the world. For our Spanish-speaking attendees, we are pleased to offer live interpretation in Spanish during today's session. So to access it, please click the interpretation icon in the Zoom menu below and select the language you prefer to hear. Let's give just one more minute so everyone can join. Okay, I see a lot of people. Amazing. Okay, let's get started. We know that for many international students and their families, the visa process can be one of the most stressful and uncertain of the study abroad journey. And for you, our trusted agent partners, it can also be one of the hardest parts to advise on, especially as immigration policies shift and every student case is a little different. So that's exactly why we are hosting today's webinar to give you clear, practical, and up-to-date guidance straight from a legal expert, and to make sure you feel more confident supporting students through this critical step. So we are very lucky today to be joined by two fantastic speakers. Let's welcome Anna, who is a seasoned international education professional and a familiar face to many of you already. She leads global engagement for Avila University Arizona, where she works closely with international partners and counselors worldwide. With more than 15 years of experience in global student recruitment and partnership development, Anna brings a deep understanding of what students and families need and how we can better serve them across borders. She will be guiding today's discussion from the student and institutional perspective. And our special guest today, Travis. He's a former U.S. diplomat and consular officer who spent over 6 years interviewing thousands of visa applicants, including students, business executives, and immigrants during assignments in China, Mexico, and Guatemala. Through that experience, he has gained a deep understanding of how visa officers evaluate applications and make decisions. And more importantly, of course, he realized that visa applicants often fail at their interview because they didn't understand the nuanced requirements or simply did not know how to effectively convey their personal and professional situations to the visa officer. Today, Travis works as an immigration attorney, helping foreign nationals navigate the often confusing and opaque visa process. Often advises other immigration attorneys, corporate leaders, and school administrations to help them guide their clients, employees, students, and researchers to better prepare for the visa process, especially when navigating issues like administrative processing, waivers, or previous denials. So with that introduction, let's get started. I'll hand it over to you, Anna, to open the session and introduce us to the key discussion points.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Isadora. Thank you for the introduction. Today we have a very important session, and I'm very, very excited to see Travis today because Travis was the former consular officer in many countries for the US. So we're very, very excited because we will be able during today's session to actually ask the questions that's important for all of our agents from all around the world. So, and Travis will be able to share with us some of the information that is, available only for the visa officers and what is actually happening behind the scenes. So let's start our discussion, Travis. So I want to ask you, someone who's done tens of thousands of the interviews. And we all know that our education agents, they have a lot of experience in preparing documents, I-20, visa applications. But when it comes to the visa interviews, there is a lot of mystery about these questions. So tell us, how many interviews actually the visa officers doing per day, and how this amount of the interviews is affecting the length and the duration of these interviews? Thank you, Travis. Over to you.
Yeah, it might surprise many people that when I was a visa officer in Beijing, just as an example, I would often conduct over 150 visa interviews in a single day. It was always more than 100, usually more than 120. And so what that really means is I had maybe 1 to 3 minutes with each applicant. It means that, the visa officer is basically in a rush because they don't have the luxury of time. And it makes the job really difficult because I think that with more time, maybe better decisions could be reached. But without the luxury of more time to really get to know somebody, it really is on the applicant's shoulders. It's their responsibility to demonstrate why they should be approved. And that's what, we can talk about that in more detail today. But I think that's a situation that a lot of people, a lot of student applicants especially, are not aware of, is that it really is up to them to prove their qualifications in a very short amount of time.
Perfect. So it actually sounds impossible. More than 100 interviews per day in my mind. So in a 1 to 3 minutes interviews, right? And I've noticed again, I've been through U.S. interview myself, and I know how the visa officers sometimes they always look for the screen. So
Hmm.
what are they checking? Because I know in a 1 minute interview time, plus they're always checking on the screen. What is happening? What are they looking in the screen? And how the students, what's the best behavior for the students during this time when the officer is looking actually on the screen?
I tell you what, Anna, I'm going to share some slides
Yeah.
because I think that there's a lot going on here, and so it's going to be easier if we show this. So, first of all, the officer, I mentioned a minute ago that the officer has very limited time, 1 to 3 minutes on average to conduct the entire visa interview. And that means that they may not maintain eye contact with the applicant. They may not even look at the applicant, which, it may seem a little bit rude. And, genuinely it is a little bit rude, but it really is for a legitimate reason. And that is because the visa officer is looking at a number of things on their computer monitor. And you can see in the photo we have here from our embassy in Seoul in South Korea, this is a real visa window, an interview window. This is what most, consulates and embassies look like. The officer's looking at that computer monitor and they're trying to go through a lot of information in a very short amount of time. So, the first thing that happens when the applicant reaches the window is they will present that DS 160 confirmation sheet. It has a barcode on the top, and this is why that sheet is required even to get into the embassy or consulate in the first place. This barcode is what allows the visa officer to pull their details up on the computer screen. And I think a lot of people have the misperception that a visa application is going to be decided before the interview even begins. And I will tell you that that's not even possible because the visa officer has not seen any details about the applicant until they scan that barcode and pull their details up on the screen. So they can't make a decision
Well,
before the interview begins.
no way, because that was my perception. I always thought, they do a lot of preparation before they actually come to the interview. That's very surprising.
Now, there are other types of visas, like immigrant visas, for example,
Yeah.
where there is some preparation, or E2 investor visas, as an example. But
Mhm.
for student visas, for F, J,
Mhm.
and M visas, there is no possible way. There's simply no time, to pre-adjudicate these applications. So when the officer scans the barcode, they're going to see several things on their computer screen, starting with a couple of rectangles that are different colors, which kind of immediately tell the officer a couple of key details. So they will see a rectangle that's green if this applicant has been approved previously, or it's yellow if the applicant has been denied previously. So, first of all, it makes no sense to try to hide any of these details on the DS 160 application form. The visa officer immediately knows this to be the truth, right?
Mhm.
So you'll see kind of a golden thread through everything we talk about today, Anna, that honesty is super important. If an officer starts to see for any reason that an applicant may not be credible, maybe they're trying to hide something, then the interview's over Because why would the officer waste any more time trying to ask more questions if they can't believe what the applicant's saying, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it starts with, okay, I know that this applicant has either, never applied before, or they've been approved, or they've been denied. They will also know if the applicant has any pending immigrant visa or green card petitions on file, and they will know if this applicant has any criminal history from almost any country, certainly the United States, but also the United States shares some basic criminal details with other countries and vice versa. So, applicants, I always advise my clients that if they have any criminal record, even if charges have been expunged or a case has been thrown out, that will still appear on the visa officer's screen. And the officer almost certainly will ask about it. So again, don't hide that on the DS 160. Be transparent, be forthcoming. Now, beyond that, there is a system that we sometimes refer to as a hit or a lookout. And this is basically a flag that a whole host of sources can put in. It could be another government agency like the Department of Homeland Security. It could be somebody in the embassy has added a little flag to the file because they're aware of something. Maybe somebody reached out to the embassy and said, "Hey, this guy is lying about this." It's basically a little nudge to the officer that maybe you need to look into this issue a little bit further. So after the officer looks at those four details very quickly on their screen, they will then do probably two things, not necessarily in this order, but they're going to look at the DS 160 responses. They're probably not going to look at every single response because, again, there's not a lot of time, but they are going to scroll to some key responses that, this is going to be different for every applicant, but for a specific person in a specific situation, they may be interested in, do you have family in the US? Or how did you explain a previous refusal? Or what have you done for work? And then they're going to look at notes that previous visa officers have entered in previous interviews. And this is something that's a little bit scary. So every time somebody appears for an interview, an officer, obviously, they're going to make a decision. Congratulations, you're approved, or sorry, I can't approve you. They will then type a detailed justification into the digital file that explains their decision, whether it's, positive or negative. Those notes are secret. They're not available to the applicant. There's no way to get access to these notes. But every time the applicant goes to an interview in the future visa officers can review those notes. And so while most refusals, especially under Section 214B of the Immigration and Nationality Act, most refusals are simply temporary. At that point in time, the applicant maybe didn't convince their officer that they were approvable or that they were qualified. These notes live with the file forever. And knowing that this is the first thing or one of the first things the officer will review before starting the next interview, that means that applicants really should strategically prepare for every interview. They should take this seriously. This is not a formality. I tell applicants, even if they've been accepted to one of the top Ivy League universities in the United States, do not assume that you're just going to be approved. This is a tough process. But the last thing I'll say here, Anna, is, the officer is looking through a lot of information. This is a fairly exhausting mental exercise that they're going through hundreds of times a day, right? And so many applicants ask me, should they start talking right when they get to the window? And I always say, no, 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 no. Give the officer some time. They may need a couple of seconds. They may need several minutes to review some details on their computer screen. And, they're doing a lot of mental concentration. And so if you're on the other side of this window trying to tell them why they should say yes, it can, at best, it can be annoying. At worst, it can be jarring and confusing, and you're not likely to get a good response. So the applicant should wait for the officer to assimilate all these details and then start the interview with the first question.
Okay, thank you. So it's very interesting because I know a lot of students so stressed about the interview, so they start talking as soon as they get to this window. So yeah, I think it's important to remember that we need to give some time for the officer to actually review the file. And I really like your comment about being honest, because every time anyone crossing the U.S. border, it feels like they know everything about this person, because I think that's the only one country when you're crossing the border, at least between Canada and US, they don't ask you for the copy of your passport. So you just look at the camera and they already know everything about you. So it's very, very interesting, because it's definitely, I think, number one advice is not to lie on any questions, because if they do know everything. Yeah,
That's
thank
right.
you.
I mean,
Thank you. Yeah.
we call this an exercise in trust. And I actually tell my clients, assume the officer knows everything about you. I mean,
Mhm.
of course that's not true, right? There's no way they could know everything about you, but it's pretty likely they're going to know some of these key details. Do you have family in the United States? Have you been arrested? These things that maybe somebody's telling you you want to hide. Don't lie about anything.
Yeah, honesty is important. So okay, so once we pass the interview, everything is good. The one of the main reasons for the refusals, it's always like your ties to the home country, your academic plan, how the agents can make it even more stronger. What's your advice?
So let's start, Anna, with what is the actual criteria that officers are looking for. And actually, let me just start with this 214B law. It's a subsection of the Immigration and Nationality Act, which we commonly just shorten to 214B. It's the most common reason for a student visa denial. And what 214B essentially says is every applicant seeking any non-immigrant visa, which includes a student visa, is presumed to have immigrant intent, or they're presumed to be an intending immigrant to the United States. And so they don't qualify for a temporary pass into the United States, this temporary visa, because they're actually planning to never leave, or they're going to somehow otherwise violate the terms of this visa. So all 214B really says is the visa officer should evaluate three criteria generally, right? They should start by saying, is this person sitting in front of me, are they actually a student? Are they planning to go to the United States with this ticket, with this visa, to enroll in class and ultimately complete their program or graduate? And by the way, their ability to speak English matters because our courses, our classes are predominantly taught in English in the United States. And so if an applicant can't speak just a basic level of English, how could they actually really be a student? How could they go to class? How can they ultimately
Mhm.
graduate? So, no flowery language. There's no need for advanced vocabulary. Just, you know, are you somebody that looks like a credible student and can speak a basic level of English? Number two, do you have some sort of financial arrangements that will cover the total expense listed on your I-20 or DS 2019 form? There's no magic number that needs to be in a bank account. There's no magic, formula for this. It really is more or less a binary yes or no. Do you have enough money arranged to pay for your expenses? And then number three, Anna, is what you were getting to, which is what we commonly call ties to home.
Mhm.
And what that really is, again, this is a non-immigrant visa, which means that it does not entitle you to come to the United States and stay permanently. And so the student applicant has to prove that somehow, for some reason or reasons, they're going to be compelled to return home after their program concludes. And that could be after they graduate or, after their OPT or STEM OPT comes to an end. Whatever their program kind of contains, they need to prove that there's a compelling reason that they're going to return home. And then I mentioned earlier, because there's this legal assumption that the applicant does not qualify for the visa until they demonstrate that they do, the applicant has the responsibility to essentially convince the visa officer to say yes. And so this is a little bit confusing because when applicants are refused under 214B, they're often given a form, letter, a piece of paper that says you have been refused under section 214B of the Immigration and Nationality Act. And it will often say, because you have not shown that you have ties to home, or, we don't, we're not convinced that you don't have immigrant intent, some version of that. And this is confusing because the real reason for the denial may have nothing to do with number three, with ties to home. But the visa officer is trained not to tell the real concrete reason for the denial. I've trained visa officers myself. I know this is frustrating. But for all the applicant knows, they were actually denied because they didn't convince the officer that they had sufficient money arranged, finances arranged. Or maybe they, weren't able to speak English during the interview, or they just weren't able to explain their plans in a way that led the officer to conclude that, yeah, this seems like somebody going to study versus somebody that might just be trying to find a job. So 214B is way more than just this idea of ties to home. It includes basically all of the criteria for the visa, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it is makes sense. And Travis, I was thinking, I know you mentioned there are no like magic number for the financials, but I know I saw some of the questions in the chat. So our partners, they want to know, at least, can you just give us the former officer, like what is the number? What's the percentage? Okay, if you look for the I-20, it can be 25, 30,000 for the, tuition accommodation. So what is the percentage of this expected on the bank statements, or if they submit additional documents? Can you just speak a little bit more about the financial requirements?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really common question that we get from student applicants, and there's not a magic number at all, right? There's not even a magic percentage. So let me try to break it down.
Okay.
What the visa officer will do is they will look at the I-20 form, and there's a line item total expense. It'll be tuition expense,
Yeah.
living expenses, and let's say that total is 30,000 US dollars.
Okay.
That's in the left column.
Left
In the
side.
right column is the funds that are available. Whether it's
Mhm.
from the student's own savings or family money or student loans or scholarships or some combination of all of this. And the officer is really just comparing the total funds available to the total cost. And so if the total cost is 30,000, the total funds available are 30,000, then that should be okay.
Should
But the
be.
student has to explain where that money's coming from. That's the key here. So it's never going to be enough to just say, my mom is going to give me the money for school. Well, I mean, anybody could say that, right? So what the officer is looking for is, how is your source of funds, in this example, your mother, how is your mother able to pay for your school? What does she do for work, right? Give me some context around this. How long has she been saving money? Why has she decided to invest in your education? This is all something that, sorry, my partner is running into the office here.
It's like on
This is
those
all something that's
YouTube
very
videos.
important. Another former visa officer, by the way. This is all something that the officer wants to try to understand as they reach that minimal level of confidence, right? Because Anna, if you tell me my father is going to pay for my school, that doesn't mean anything. But if you can tell me my father has offered to pay for my school, he works at a construction company where he's worked for the last 17 years. He manages a team of 7 people. They build these types of buildings. Actually, he was responsible for the hotel right down the street here. He thinks that education is super important because of these reasons. And so he's been saving money for over a decade for me to have this opportunity. Now I'm thinking, my goodness, that's understandable. That's credible. There's a lot of context here. And so what I always challenge students with is, don't ask yourself, what is this magic number I need to prove? challenge yourself to explain where this number comes from.
Mhm.
And then one more thought here, because student loans are often a source
Mhm.
of concern for students. There is an assumption that if I take a student loan out, there's no way I'm going to be approved. That's not true. And I will tell you, in the United States, like I went to law school with the assistance of student loans. If it wasn't for student loans, I would not be a lawyer today. And most visa officers will have a similar experience. So just because a student takes out a loan does not mean they're going to be disqualified. However, the visa officer will be thinking or will be wondering, how is this, individual going to repay this loan? And this will be an even more, a greater concern in countries that have a lower kind of average salary or,
Mhm.
annual income rate. So if we take, for example, a student that's in a lower average salary country, and they're taking a student loan out of 150,000 US dollars, the concern is not you're taking a student loan out. The concern is, how are you going to be able to repay this loan? And is this going to be a reason for you to stay in the United States to maybe find a job because you've got such a mountain of debt that you have to repay? So, these factors can be a little bit tied together, if that makes sense. And it
No, it is
all
makes
comes
sense.
down to how the applicant explains it.
Hmm. Yeah, it is makes sense. It's so you're saying that the amount can be exactly as a I-20 requires or higher. It's not
Yes.
important. The number, there's no magic number, but it's very important where the money is coming from. And it's very, I know a lot of countries using the third, company providers for the loan services. And it's very important that you brought this topic up because of that there are nothing wrong about using those loans company. It's just if you have a clear strategy on explaining how you're going to pay this loan after the education program, right? Okay.
That's right.
Thank you. It's very, very clear. It's very helpful. I'm pretty sure our agents appreciating all of this information.
I hope
Right,
so.
guys? Yes, yes, I can see some hearts. So perfect. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about the red flags. So, as these officers, what would be, the red flags when they see it on the application? Is like, okay, no way it's going to be approved. What are those red flags? Please share with us.
Well, Anna, you are in luck because I've got a slide with a red flag on it
Wow,
right
no
here.
way.
So yeah, let's talk about red flags. And I actually think that this is really important because there are lots of kind of rumors and actually bad advice circulating online. I think one of the biggest red flags, and this is from my own experience, is the first bullet point here, which is vague or scripted answers. So first of all, I was talking about those three criteria a moment ago, and the fact that an applicant has the responsibility to establish their qualifications. So a lot of agents and a lot of, internet message boards recommend that students give short, concise, often one-word answers. And I will tell you that is the opposite of a good strategy. Because, Anna, if you're standing in front of my window and I say, okay, what are you doing in the United States? And you say, school. And this is how a lot of these interviews go, by the way. This sounds crazy, but this is very common. What school are you going to? Travis University. Okay, what are you going to study there? MBA. Now, I've already asked you three questions, and I know nothing about you. I know nothing about your motivations. How can I determine if you're a credible student when you aren't telling me anything? Right? So vague answers or short, concise answers are not going to establish your qualifications. So more detail, more context is necessary. So, challenge your students to approach the interview almost like a job interview. Lay out your qualifications for a visa and don't just offer short answers. But on the other hand, I never tell my clients what to say. I will help them understand how to explain their situation. I'll help them prioritize, some important details to share, but I never tell them what to say. And that's because, and this happened to me all the time, if a student comes to the interview and just starts reciting a script that they've memorized, that tells me A, that's not genuine, and B, it's only something that somebody else told them to say so that they could be approved. And remember, this is an exercise in credibility, right? And so if I determine that I can't trust that what you're saying is genuine, I can't approve you. So what I will tell students is it does make sense to practice. It makes sense to prepare, but every time you kind of practice how you're going to introduce yourself, do it differently. Because if you practice the same thing over and over and over, you're going to sound like a robot when you get to the interview, and you will not appear credible. Now, beyond that, it probably goes without saying that fake documents or questionable documents are going to raise red flags. Hopefully, none of your students will do this, but it is a good idea to remind them, look, everybody has some situation that maybe they're less than proud of, or maybe they're concerned about. Be yourself, be honest. To use an American phrase, lay your cards on the table. You're in a better position than if you try to cover something up or bring a fake document to prove something else. Because if the officer finds that you're lying, you're going to be in a much worse situation than even just a simple denial. Now, beyond that, some kind of lesser flags, but still potential points of concern. Students that are going back to obtain a second bachelor's degree or a second master's degree, or maybe even a degree lower than what they already have. So, they've already been a graduate student. Now they're getting another bachelor's degree. This can raise a concern because the officer is going to be thinking, why do you actually need to go back to school? Are you trying to get this visa to get into the country, and you're just using school as an excuse? Because you already have a master's degree or you already have a bachelor's degree. So students in this situation need to be extra clear. They need to really tell their story and explain why they've made this decision, because that will be a concern. And then the last two here are related. So I mentioned that, one of the three criteria that the officer is looking at is, are you going to leave the United States after you complete your program? Do you have what we call ties to home? And so for students who have family in the United States, that could trigger a conclusion that the student is just trying to get into the country to live with that family member, and or, they're never going to leave. For students who have a pending application for a green card, it's a similar concern. We all know that, the path to a green card can be super long. It can be decades for some, citizens, depending on circumstances. And so there's a concern that, all right, Anna, you want to move to the United States. You've already shown your desire to become a United States citizen with this application, but it's going to take you a long time. Is this student visa application a way to circumvent that wait? And so these issues aren't necessarily going to automatically lead to a disqualification, but a student needs to be extra clear when they explain their situation and their motivation and plans.
Yeah, makes sense. And I find it, it's kind of the students needs to be somewhere in the middle, because of when you try and the answers too short and you don't provide enough information, it's not a good thing. But when the students is trying to also in one question tell everything what they know, it's also becoming, you need to know when to stop, right? Because of, okay, don't provide too much information. I think it's finding this right middle when you're providing enough information for the visa officer to make the right decision, but at the same time, don't provide unnecessary information that can, not help your application as well. So that's kind of.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to say. I would generally, I mean, this is one thing that we focus on with our clients. When an applicant engages us, the main focus is how do you tell your story? And every applicant is unique. Everybody is in a different situation. They've got different motivations. And so I think as a general rule, I would say more detail is better. I don't really want an applicant to cut themselves off or kind of, self-censor what they're saying. The visa officer will interrupt applicants. I'm sure all of you have experienced
Mhm.
this with your students. Officers are in a rush. They are not going to just let an applicant ramble for 10 straight minutes. They don't have time. And so I think instead of cutting yourself off as the applicant, I'd rather you offer as much as you can
Okay.
in the short window of time that you have before the officer interrupts you. But that's where, each case is unique. And I often tell people, look, you need to be honest. You need to be honest about this issue if the officer asks you, but maybe you don't want to volunteer that at the beginning of the interview. So there's an
Makes sense.
art to kind of what you're going to
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
prioritize behind
Makes
all of
sense.
this.
Yeah, and it really depends on the client. Yeah, no, makes sense.
Exactly.
Travis, I know you spend a lot of time in the fraud department, right?
Mm.
As well, and you have a lot of experience. And one of the other topic that is also mystery for myself, for all of our agents, it's what happening when the students going through additional administrative processing. Like what is happening there? It's like this process, it's so scared for everyone, for the students, for the agents. We definitely want to know more what is happening, what types of processes there, what is really happening there. Please share with us.
Yes. So administrative processing, first of all, is a it's an umbrella term. It means a lot of different things. So the way I think about this is at the visa interview, the officer will make a decision before the applicant leaves the window. The officer is either going to say, "Congratulations, you're approved," or "I'm sorry, I can't approve you," or "I might need more time before I can make a decision." And that is generally what we call administrative processing. Legally speaking, it's considered a refusal, although it's really not a refusal. It's kind of like pushing pause on the application while the officer reviews more documents or more details, or maybe they just need more time, right? Maybe they need to go and talk to a supervisor, or maybe there's a glitch in the computer. And this happens more often than you might expect. I just can't hit the approve button because the computer system is acting up. And so, if that's the case, I'm going to put your case on hold under what we call 221G, which is another reference to a law, or what we just commonly call administrative processing, while I work to make a decision. And so, in many cases for students, the reason for this delay is I need to see more documents. And so, particularly for graduate students or students who have done any sort of research or had, research published, officers will commonly ask to see their CV or their resume. They will ask to see their research plan, which is basically just a simple, plain English overview of what they're planning to do in the United States. They will want to see a list of the applicant's publications and then details for the applicant's advisor. And what they're doing is they're looking through that to see if this applicant needs to go through essentially a form of a background check, what we call a security advisory opinion. And there's no way that students can avoid this process. If they need to go through this, what's commonly called a checking process, they're going to go through it. And it will take about 6 to 8 weeks on average. It's unfortunate, but it is, it's part of the process. And so what I advise students, particularly, graduate students and above, is bring these documents with you in case the officer asks for them. If they decide that you need to go through this process and that you're going to be subject to this delay, at least you've got what they need at the time of the interview. Because if the student doesn't bring these documents, they're going to go back home. They're going to have to scan these documents, send them to the embassy or consulate. Then somebody's going to have to review them, then start this process. And now you've tacked on another maybe 2 weeks of delay onto, the already 6 to 8 weeks of delay. But Anna, what you were getting at in terms of fraud investigations. So a fraud investigation is also something that would generally be referred to as administrative processing. It's just another type of delay. And I did manage a fraud investigation team at one of our consulates in Mexico. I will
Okay.
tell you, that visa officers are instructed to refer a case to the fraud investigation team if they are generally inclined to issue the visa, but for an issue that they want clarity on. So there are some issues or triggers that might lead to a fraud investigation. It could be a response in the DS-160 that doesn't match what the applicant is explaining in the interview. And so, maybe the officer just wants to clarify this or maybe confirm this issue. It could be a document, maybe like a bank statement, that if it's accurate, if it's a genuine document, then the student appears qualified. But there's something about that document that looks like it may have been forged somehow. And so the officer wants the fraud team to look into that. Some embassies and consulates will have an internal policy where if an officer wants to approve an applicant who has been refused multiple times before, that applicant should be, vetted additionally by the fraud team to make sure everything checks out before they're approved. When I was in Beijing, I approved a student applicant who had been denied 9 times before.
You're a good
This is
officer.
an edge case. This is not something that's normal. But this student presented really well at their interview. And I was thinking the whole time, this poor student, why have they been denied so many times? I referred their case to our fraud team and I just said, can you double check that these details are accurate? They confirmed everything and I approved them. So that could be part of this. And then, there could be an idea of a hit or a lookout that I mentioned earlier. Or maybe somebody has written to the embassy and said, Anna is a bad seed. She's a criminal. Don't give her a visa. If I see something like that in the system, before I issue Anna a visa, I might want to check her out a little bit, right? And then finally, just vague answers. So, Anna presents pretty well. I think that she's qualified for a student visa, but she hasn't told me a lot of detail. Maybe there's just something that I'm still questioning, like her ability to pay for her education. So I want to approve her, but I've got this, one question that's remaining. I'm going to refer her application to the fraud team. And now, if and when somebody is referred to a fraud investigation, they're in for a long delay potentially. There's no maximum time that this type of investigation can take. And fraud teams have a lot of resources at their disposal. They can work with government agencies. They can do, in-person interviews, phone call, confirmations. They can look through social media. They can do all sorts of things. And so the gist of all of this is really be honest. Give real, complete, detailed answers. Don't bring fake documents. And I think above all else, just tell the truth, right? Don't leave anything to question that might trigger some concern or some doubt, because at best you're going to go into a delay. At worst, you're going to be denied. And so the truth, I told you, I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but the truth is the most important aspect of this whole process.
No, thank you, Travis. You have such a great personality. I wish all of the visa officers would have the same personality. There's so many denials. This poor guy, he got the visa, right, guys? Let's support the more visa officer like this. Thank you, Travis, for all of your support for international students. One of the topic that I also want to talk to you, some changes this year. I know some of our agents, especially with certain regions, they do apply for the interviews in other countries. And I know it's a lot of conversations happening right now. And in the past, it wasn't any issue because of the students would apply to certain country because if it's easy, they don't have a visa, the wait time for the interviews, they can get it next week. So for multiple reasons, right? But what is happening? How strict right now the policy about arranging their interview and application in their home country?
So this is a major change, actually. On September 6th, excuse me, on September 6th, the State Department issued a kind of an announcement that applicants seeking non-immigrant visas, which include student visas, are now limited to scheduling their interviews in their home country or their country of residence. And now this wasn't defined and it's up for a little bit of debate. But really what this means is you have to schedule your interview in the country that issued your passport, or the country that's listed on your passport, or in a country where you are more or less, residing. So if you're working in a country with a work visa, if you're studying in a country with a student visa, you should be able to schedule an interview there, but you can't travel to another country to schedule an interview anymore. That's the limitation. And it's a little bit disappointing. Actually, it's very disappointing for some countries specifically. Particularly countries like India, China, where the wait time to schedule an interview is quite long. Applicants from India historically have been able to go anywhere else in the world if they needed to schedule an interview sooner so that they could make the start of their class. That's no longer an option. And so the best advice that I think you can give your students now is to start the process early. As soon as you get the I-20 form, you should be filling out a DS-160 and scheduling the interview, because the wait time is real. And the worst thing that could happen is you can't find an interview before your classes begin.
Thank you. Thank you. It's very important to discuss this. Also, Travis, let's talk about the social media, because I know right now officers are spending a lot of times in the social medias. And when you're completing the forms, like, you have to list every single social media account that you have. And so, students are so scared because they don't know what kind of, posts, what kind of language, what if I've done something wrong, 3 years ago, and it's still on my social media. Should I include my social media, all of the accounts, and maybe just list few? Or, for example, some students might have no social media accounts. Does it like red flag for the visa officers? Please share your thoughts about the social media.
Yeah, so social media review, as of kind of the middle of this summer, is now a mandatory step in the visa process. So again, as soon as a student gets their I-20, they can fill out their DS-160, they can schedule their visa interview, again, in their home country. And if the visa officer is inclined to approve them, they have to review their online presence, their, social media and anything else they find on them online. Then the student can travel to the United States. And so, yeah, historically, Anna, you're right. This is not something that was a major focus. In fact, when I was a visa officer, I think I looked at social media less than 10 times throughout my entire career. I didn't have time. I wasn't that interested in it. But now it's 100% mandatory for anybody who's going to be approved. And it starts with the DS-160. So there's a question on the DS-160 form. Have you used any social media platforms in the last 5 years, or, are you still using them? And there's a menu. So it's not an unending universe of potential social media platforms that need to be listed. It really is, if you've used any of these platforms, or if you're still using them within the past 5 years, they must be listed on the DS-160. Visa officers have been instructed that if they find a platform that was not listed, then they essentially should deny the applicant, the application. They should find this a sign of a lack of credibility. So what I tell students is, if you have or are still using any of these accounts, list them all. Now, it's weird. There's a couple of platforms that are not part of this list that you would assume would be there, like WeChat is not listed. WhatsApp is not listed. Whether that's actually social media, I don't know. But MySpace is listed. I don't know anybody who still uses MySpace. But anyway, so list all of the accounts. And then the other advice that I've gotten from some embassies and consulates is, instead of, it's very small here, but there's a box that says social media identifier. Instead of just listing a username, it's actually better to list the entire URL, the website address for your account, because that will kind of expedite the embassy or consulate's review. And then finally, all accounts should be set to public. Before the interview, they should be left public until the passport is returned. I don't like this policy. I think it's a little bit dangerous. I think that, accounts are private for a reason. But this is something that students should be aware of. Set their accounts to public. They can set them back to private, but only after they get their passport back. And then Anna, the next question is probably like, what is the visa officer looking for, right? I've listed all of these accounts. What do they care about?
Because they don't have much time.
They don't have a lot of time, but this is not happening during the interview. I think it's important to note this happens after the interview.
Oh, okay.
We're seeing that it can take on average now just a couple of days.
Okay.
In the beginning, in the middle of the summer, it was taking 2 to 3 weeks on average. They've really operationalized this, but it is kind of a process that happens after the interview. And the visa officer is looking first for scary things. Is there evidence that this student is supporting a terrorist organization, or they're showing hate speech for Jewish people, or they've got pictures of them doing drugs or something like that. Hopefully this doesn't apply to any of your students.
No,
but they're also looking for some other things that are actually fairly common. They're looking for evidence that a previous visa was violated. So that could be something like a picture of a student working at a restaurant without maybe being authorized to work in the United States. Maybe they find something on a LinkedIn account that doesn't match the DS-160, right? Like maybe you say that you started a job on February 1st in your LinkedIn account, but your DS-160 says December 1st. Well, one of those is wrong. And is the student now lying? We don't know. So what I tell students is, give your online presence a good review. Make sure there's nothing that you wouldn't be scared to appear on the front page of your national newspaper. But really more than that, make sure your details are accurate. Look through your LinkedIn page, look through your Facebook page. Make sure you're not portraying an image that might trigger the wrong conclusion, and then make sure your details are accurate.
Yeah, very nice. Or if there's something wrong there, just delete those posts. Be prepared.
I have yet to advise a client to delete a post.
Can
Something
they see
about
that?
it doesn't feel right. I don't know, to be honest. I don't know if the government can see deleted posts, but to me, it doesn't feel right. It feels like it's not a lie, of course, but it feels like it's close to a lie. Like I'm hiding something in my application. This is definitely a case by case situation, but yeah, I have not told anybody to delete a post.
Makes sense. Yeah. No, I was just wondering if they know if the students, for example, deleting, not deleting. And it might not be scared, but sometimes students like, oh, I don't know how this picture, or I don't know how this, they might be at the party or something, but now I'm going to study, how they will assessing those posts.
Yeah.
And so be careful.
This is where a student honestly should reach out to an immigration lawyer. Reach out to me. I can help. It's very nuanced. There's really not a good general rule that can be applied, because this is such kind of a fuzzy set of criteria, right? And it's very much subject to an individual human being's interpretation.
Mm-hmm. And so, but the most importantly, I think all of the data, the numbers, the months, everything has to be in line with the applications. That's they can do and double check from their side. And 100%. As you mentioned, like LinkedIn and all of the other profiles. No, good, perfect. Thank you so much for sharing this insight. Let's move to the crossing the border. So our students passed the interview. He's great on the social media. What is happening, how they need to be prepared. And I know sometimes they said sending the students for the additional screening, why it's happening and how we can avoid it.
Yeah. So, the Customs and Border Protection Officer, or CBP officer, that's the gentleman you see in this picture. They're the ones that you hand your passport to when you get to the United States. They are very different from a visa officer. You know, they wear uniforms, they carry weapons often, they often wear bulletproof vests. They are absolutely law enforcement personnel. So it's a very different interaction with them than what you would have with a visa officer who's just a regular civilian like me. And so what I tell students is treat this interaction like you treated your visa interview. Be ready to answer their questions and, you know, provide your introduction, your explanation. But remember that they have a lot of power. They have the ability to search through any electronic device you have, your phone, your laptop, your tablet, uh, and they can pull you into additional questioning. They can deny your access to the United States. So treat this as a an important formal discussion. It really is important. Just because you have a visa doesn't mean you're just going to skate through the process. Beyond that, I would always recommend that the student brings their I-20 and their passport with them in their carry-on baggage. That's the first thing they're going to have to produce when they get to the CBP officer. So if the I-20 form is in your suitcase and you don't have it with you, you're going to be delayed and probably face more questions. And I would also just say as a reminder, I always call the visa your ticket into the United States. And that ticket has an expiration date. So if your visa has expired, you cannot use it to enter the country. You're going to be turned around and most likely you'll have to schedule a new interview and get a new visa. So plan ahead. Make sure that your visa is going to still be valid, you know, it unexpired when you arrive. And if not, plan to get a new visa before you travel.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Travis. And I think, I know it's been 1 hour, time flies, but we still have a few questions. I think the questions that, we facing every single day, it's the refusals. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of our students, sometimes very strong cases, but they still get the refusals. We don't know why. What is happening? Can you please share your insights about the refusals and how we can improve the application and what we can do with those refusals?
Yeah, so I think the first thing I'll say here is if a student has been denied, it is a good idea to recommend that they seek some assistance. You know, this is what my partner and I do. We help applicants kind of prepare strategically for their application and their interview. As I mentioned earlier, a visa officer is never going to give a clear, concrete justification for a denial. They're going to give some, you know, vague boilerplate letter that just says something like, you didn't prove you have ties to home. It doesn't mean anything. So I will tell students generally, don't try to guess at the reason you were denied and don't try to explain that in your next application. Because what tends to happen, and I saw this all the time, you know, I'm about to interview a student. I look at their DS 160 and it says, I was denied because my officer was concerned about my finances. And now I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, should I also be concerned about their finances? So instead of volunteering or trying to explain a previous refusal, try to instead, you know, the student should try to instead focus on their qualifications. They should challenge themselves to explain their motivations, their plans, their situation at home with more clarity, more context, so that they're able to demonstrate why they should be approved. And you know, with any previously refused applicant, they should be prepared for some version of the question, what has changed since your last interview? And what the officer's really asking when they ask this question is, look, I see that one of my colleagues determined at a certain point in time that you were not qualified for this visa. Why should I reach a different conclusion? And so, you know, if something has changed, the student should volunteer that, you know, if they've reached new milestones, if they've accomplished something. But if arguably nothing has changed, that can be a very difficult question to answer. You know, maybe I'm seeking a visa to go to the same school, study the same thing. I've got the same plan after I graduate. And that's where it's hard to give kind of a blanket recommendation here because every applicant's situation is different. But you know, kind of generally, I would say the student should reiterate their qualifications. Re-summarize why the officer should approve them. But again, this is a real opportune time to send the student to a professional for help, because the more refusals that a student starts accumulating, the harder it's going to be approved in the future, because notes from those refusals are in their file permanently. And it's something that the officer is going to look at before each subsequent interview. So the more negative notes an officer's looking at, the more to use an American phrase, the well is poisoned, right? They're focused on some negative details before they even begin. So take the subsequent interview very seriously is my general advice here.
Okay, thank you. And Travis, just to kind of for myself or agents, can you give us top tips when we submitting the students' applications? Just some highlights.
Yes. So I mentioned earlier, speak English. The officer's not evaluating if your English is perfect, but they are trying to reach a minimal level of confidence that the student can understand what's being taught. They can go to class, hopefully graduate. Truth and honesty are really important. And while the student is hopefully telling the truth, they should be offering as much detail and as much context as they can. One word answers are never going to be sufficient. Take every opportunity you're given as an applicant, as a student visa applicant, to provide more details, more justification for a yes. And then I would say, we haven't really talked about this, Anna, but a lot of students reach out to us and say, I was refused and the officer didn't even look at my documents. And I will tell you, that's by design. The whole idea that we require applicants to come into a face-to-face interview and speak with a visa officer is because documents can be easily forged. They can be confusing at best. And so visa officers are trained not to look at documents unless they just really need to. And so I will advise my clients to come prepared, often with a lot of documents, but not to volunteer them. I want them to focus on how they verbally explain their qualifications, but they should have documents if they are asked. And so I think it's a good idea to remind your students that they really shouldn't rely on documents. They should be prepared to explain their qualifications instead. And then finally, don't leave the process to chance. That's why I'm here. That's why my partner and I, do what we do. Feel free to reach out to us if your students have questions, if you think they might need some help. Don't set them up for failure by just, saying, go ahead, it's going to be easy.
Yeah, thank you, Travis. And I know you have a lot of free resources like social media. Can you share with us as well so our partners, agents can also watch and then get some insights from your social media?
We do. Yeah. We have a YouTube channel where we often post, free videos. We talk about all sorts of issues for students and other applicants. We talk about denials. We talk about how to explain funding. We talk about when and where to apply. We give good overviews of kind of the whole process. And then beyond that, Anna, we also have online guides. My partner and I, we often, as lawyers, we engage with clients one-on-one, and we realize that students often have the exact same questions, the exact same concerns. So we decided, instead of limiting ourselves, our availability to these one-on-one meetings, we put all of our expertise and experience into self-service guides that can be accessed online. And so if you go to zfvisaguides.com, you'll see a course that guides students through the DS-160 with a step-by-step instructional guide on how to answer every question. We have a course that's focused on preparing for the interview itself. We offer a proven and effective formula to communicate with the visa officer. And then we have a complete end-to-end guide. It starts with the I-20, includes the DS-160, the interview. We talk about how to avoid complications, and we include a live Q&A session with either myself or my partner so that, the applicants can ask lingering questions. And I would also say that these guides have been very popular with DSOs and ROs at universities. So if any of you personally are grappling with how the process works and maybe you have questions yourself, take a look at these courses. I think you might get something out of it. We also have a free roadmap that you can download from ZF Visa Guides that, it's kind of a high level step-by-step process for scheduling the interview, etc. So it's a good place to start. And then, finally, if your students do have legal concerns, maybe they have criminal issues in their past, they've been refused before, they're stuck in an administrative processing delay, or maybe they just want kind of a one-on-one session to practice likely interview questions. We're happy to connect with them. They can schedule time with us directly at our law firm's website, zfvisa.com, or you can see our email address here. They can reach out to us at info@zfvisa.com. You can as well, and we can explain what we can do to help.
Thank you, Travis. It's amazing. I love it, and actually, I can see the reaction from our agent partners as well while you're talking about all of these resources available. And I saw a lot of hearts, thumbs up. So I can see there's a lot of good reaction. So yeah, thank you guys. Yeah, I would like to say thank you for you, Travis, one more time. That was amazing session. I learned a lot. I don't think I ever had the opportunity to hear directly from the consular officer, former consular officer from the US. So that's the insights I think our agents won't be able to get anywhere else. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you for all of our agents who attended. I hope that information was very helpful for you guys. And just want to say before we conclude that we will have some upcoming webinars, some very exciting on the CPT, OPT, H-1B visa changes. So it's coming up in next month. So stay tuned for this one. So we want to make sure we bring the topics and the questions that really matters, that's really important for you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for your time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Travis.